SOAP, man. SOAP, man. SOAP. Yo. Welcome back to another episode of Son of a Preacher Man. As always, I am your host, SOAP, man. Yo, I got a lot to cover, so let's just jump right off into it. Now, the story of King Saul is a sad and tragic tale. King Saul reigned as the first king of Israel for 40 years, and he had a good start. His first 2 years, he was successful. He defeated his number one enemies, the Philistines, or at least fought them off. And he fought a number of other tribes or factions or nations or whatever you would call them. But his first 2 years, he was successful. But the Bible says after 2 years reigning in Israel, Saul started to decline. And the reason he started to decline was for his lack of faith. The first mistake that Saul made, and you saw signs of this during Saul's inauguration or ceremonial induction as king. He hid. They had to go find him. So to me, that was a big red flag. But his first 2 years were successful. I give him that. Saul was a brute, all brawn, no brains. His first 2 years were successful against his enemies, and then he sinned against God. The Bible says that he sacrificed when Samuel, the prophet, didn't show up when he thought Samuel should have shown up. And so he performed Samuel's office because Samuel wasn't there. And right after he did that, Samuel showed up and told Saul that because of his sin and his lack of faith, that he would be replaced by somebody better than him. Then later, Saul sinned again when he went against the Amalekites. And Samuel told him, exact God's vengeance and wrath upon the Amalekites. Don't save anything, burn it all down, kill everybody. And Saul didn't do that. He saved the best of what the king of Amalek had, and he saved the king of Amalek himself alive. So that was the second big boo-boo of Saul's. In my last episode, Saul has hit rock bottom. And for Saul, that's saying a lot because we've seen Saul on hard times before. But in my last episode, he had really hit rock bottom. The Philistines had gathered themselves against the armies of Israel. Saul looked out at the Philistine army. It didn't look good to him. His entire reign, or most of his reign, 38 of his 40-year reign, he was consumed with rage and vengeance and jealousy. He chased David around for between 5 and 10 years. Who knows how long? I personally think it was 5. And I'm going to talk about this episode. I made an error earlier in a previous episode where I said King Saul was chasing David around for 10 years. And now I think, now that I've been doing a lot of research and studies on these videos, I think it was more along the line of 5. But I'm not going to get into that right now. Let's stay on topic. In my last video, Saul had hit rock bottom. He was at the lowest of low points. Out of desperation, out of sheer let me tell you, Saul's lack of faith and confusion has led him to a position where he is desperate as a lunatic. In my last episode, he goes to see the witch of Endor, a woman living in the town of Endor who's known to be able to talk to the dead. Now, Saul knows he's dead wrong for this because he previously put out all the wizards and witches and necromancers and people with familiar spirits. He got rid of all those type of people out of the land of Israel. So he knows he's wrong for doing this, but Saul is desperate And desperate times call for desperate times call for desperate measures. Ladies and gentlemen, we are still in the first book of Samuel. And this is the last time that we'll be reading out of the first book of Samuel. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Son of a Preacher Man proudly presents, for the last time, the second book of Samuel, part 13, the death of King Saul, the fall of Saul, y'all. 1 Samuel chapter 28 verses 1 through 6 reads, "And it came to pass in those days that the Philistines gathered their armies together for warfare to fight with Israel. And Achish said to David, Know thou assuredly that thou shalt go out with me to battle, thou and thy men. And David said to Achish, Surely thou shalt know what thy servant can do. And Achish said to David, Therefore will I make thee keeper of mine head forever. Now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had lamented him, and buried him in Ramah, even in his own city. And Saul had put away those that had familiar spirits, and the wizards out of the land. And the Philistines gathered themselves together and came and pitched in Shunem. And Saul gathered all Israel together, and they pitched in Gilboa. And when Saul saw the host of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart greatly trembled. And when Saul inquired of the Lord answered him not, neither by dreams, nor by Urim, nor by prophets." Now I'm taking this nice and slow for a reason. And I went back a little bit to Samuel chapter 28. And we're going to skip to Samuel chapter 30 or 31. But I wanted to go back because it says, let's unpack these verses for clarity. It says, "And it came to pass in those days that the Philistines gathered their armies together for warfare to fight with Israel." Now, come on. Now, there should be nothing strange about that, okay? The Philistines come out to fight the armies of Israel. There's nothing new about that. There's nothing to be said. But why is it saying that David is with the Philistines? Okay, I'll explain why. David is out there with the Philistine ranks because of Saul. See, it all started out when Saul first put David to the run. I'm sorry I'm flipping through these slides, but my computer is froze, as you see. Oh, okay, it's back. Okay, so let me tell you how we got to this awkward scenario. You got the Philistine armies coming out against the Israelite armies. Nothing new there. This has happened countless of times. But this time, you got Israelites, meaning David, in the ranks of the Philistine army. Now, how did we get to this point? It's because of Saul. Saul may not have wanted it this way, but he made it this way. And the ironic thing is that David is the one person who could actually turn the tide of this lopsided battle in favor of the Philistines. David is an Israelite. He wants to fight for the Israelite army. He's proud of his heritage and his culture. But because of Saul, he has had to take refuge with the enemies of the Israelites. You see, after David killed Goliath, Saul became extremely jealous. He tried to kill David numerous times, to the point where he put David on the run. Now, relatives of David and everybody else who had a gripe against the government, when they heard this valiant hero was on the run, they came to his aid. And David and his small rebellion, his small militia, they hid out in caves and in the wilderness. But they formed this nice, solid, small core, cohesive kingdom, if you will. Even the son of the high priest came to David because King Saul killed and slaughtered his entire family. So all this is of King Saul's making, that David had to be on the run in the first place. In David's initial meeting with the king of Gath, King Achish, the Philistine king, in his initial meeting with him, he's afraid of King Achish. He feigns insane. He starts foaming at the mouth, scratching at the post. King Achish says, get this crazy mental case out of here. What am I to do with him? And the reason David does this is because David's famous, and the Philistines, some of them, they notice him. And they say, isn't this the famous David who killed his 10,000s against Saul's thousands? And that's when David starts playing crazy to get away. He's in fear for his life. The Bible said he was in great fear of his life. And so he was able to get away, but he ends up having to come back to King Achish years later. Why? Because King Saul is still on his trail. So he comes back to King Achish, the Philistine king of Gath, and they form an alliance. David comes to him correct. He comes real. He says, look, my king has put me on the run. He wants my head. I'm not safe. Can you give me a safe place to stay? Now, King Achish looks at this like a win. The Israelites are his enemies, and now he's got their #1 hero as an ally because of the insanity, desperation, and jealousy of King Saul. And King Achish, he looks at David like, hey, this kid's a benefit to me. He goes out, he pillages, he plunders, and he brings me back my part of the spoil. See, David is good at what he does. He goes out and pillages and plunders. When he comes back, he always gives King Achish a portion of his winnings, a portion of his plunder, and he tells King Achish, yeah, I slaughtered some of my own people for this spoil that I'm giving you. But David's lying. He actually is still fighting the enemies of the Israelites, the Amalekites, and people, and nations like them. He's not fighting his own people, but he's lying to King Achish, telling him that he is. So King Achish, he loves David. So fast forward to where we are now. The Philistine armies, they come out against King Saul and the armies of the Israelites. And the Bible says when King Saul looks at the host that the Philistines have put together, he shats a brick. He knows he is done for. He knows this is an army that has been amassed for one sole purpose, his annihilation. This is an army. He sees the siege weapons. He sees the troops. He sees the armaments. He sees the resources. He sees the gear. He sees the weapons. He sees the resources, the rations, and he's like, these boys are here to stay. They're here for the long haul. They mean business. And the most killing part of it all is that his #1 fighter, the person who could probably turn the tide of the battle for him, is within the Philistine host. And so that's the premise I'm setting. That's the scene I'm setting. That's what we starting off. Bad. 1 Samuel chapter 29 verses 1 through 5 reads, now the Philistines gathered together all their armies to Aphek. And the Israelites pitched by a fountain which is in Jezreel. And the lords of the Philistines passed on by hundreds and by thousands. But David and his men passed on in the rearward with Achish, who's the king. or at least he's the king of one of the 5 major cities of the Philistines. He's the king of Gath, where the famous Philistine hero Goliath is from, whom David killed, just to catch you up. Then said the princes of the Philistines, what do these Hebrews here? That's what they say when they saw David and his men. Because David's there with his 600 men. They say, what do these Hebrews here? And Achish said unto the princes of the Philistines, is not this David, the servant of Saul, the king of Israel, which hath been with me these days, or these years? And I have found no fault in him since he fell unto me, unto this day? And the princes of the Philistines were wroth with him. And the princes of the Philistines said unto him, make this fellow return, that he may go again to his place which thou hast appointed him. And let him not go down with us to battle, lest in the battle he be an adversary to us. For wherewith should we reconcile him? For wherewith should he reconcile himself unto his master? Should it not be with the heads of these men? Is not this David, of whom they sang to another in dances, saying, Saul slew his thousands, and David his 10,000s? 1 Samuel chapter 29, verses 6 through 11 says, then Achish called David and said unto him, surely as the Lord liveth, thou hast been upright, and thy going out and thy coming in with me in the host is good in my sight. For I have not found evil in thee since the day of thy coming unto me unto this day. Nevertheless, the Lord's favor thee not. Wherefore now return and go in peace, that thou displease not the lords of the Philistines. And David said unto Achish, but what have I done? David's playing stupid now. Okay, he gets it. These other Philistine lords, nah, look at me. David's playing stupid. Don't believe the hype. These other Philistine lords don't trust David, and they got good reason not to trust him. He's one of the enemies. Why would they go into battle with somebody that could turn on them at a dime? The drop of a dime, or turn on them on a dime. And second of all, the Philistine lords say, is this not David, the famous hero who have, done so much, who have killed so many of us, who has defeated, all of his enemies? Anybody who steps up to him finds their head in their lap. We ain't trusting this dude to go down to battle. He'll just turn on us and go back to his master, King Saul. So Achish says, yo, David, my boys ain't feeling you. So David says, but what have I done playing stupid? And what hast thou found? David says, but what have I done? And what hast thou found thy servant so long as I have been with thee unto this day, that I may not go fight against the enemies of my lord the king? And Achish answered and said to David, I know that thou art good in my sight, and I have in big bold red print, this is the king of Gath, a Philistine lord, an enemy of the Israelites. And he says to David, and I have in big bold red print, he says, you know you are good in my sight as an angel of God. That is how the enemy of the Israelites describes David. Even his sworn enemies hold him with the highest of esteem. King Achish continues, notwithstanding the princes of the Philistines have said, he shall not go up with us to the battle. Wherefore now rise up early in the morning with thy master's servants that are come with thee. And as soon as ye be up early in the morning and have light, depart. So David and his men rose up early to depart in the morning and returned into the land of the Philistines. And the Philistines went up to Jezreel. Now let me explain to you what's finna happen. The Bible is about to go into two separate stories that are occurring simultaneously. One is about David and one is about King Saul. Spoiler alert, these stories occur simultaneously. It's going to start with King David. I'm sorry, he's not king yet. Spoiler alert. It's going to start with David, but I'm letting you know, while this story is occurring with David, simultaneously, King Saul is battling the Philistines, and the Bible's going to tell that story next. I just want you to know, these two stories coming up happen simultaneously. 1 Samuel chapter 30, verses 1 through 7. And it reads, "And it came to pass, when David and his men were come to Ziklag," that's within the Philistine territory, that's the land within Gath that King Achish gave to David and his 600 troops. It says, "And it came to pass, when David and his men were come to Ziklag on the 3rd day, that the Amalekites had invaded the south." And the Amalekites had invaded the south and Ziklag, and smitten Ziklag, and burned it with fire, and had taken the women captives that were therein. They slew not any. They slew not any, either great or small, but carried them away and went on their way. So David and his men came to the city, and behold, it was burned with fire, and their wives, and their sons, and their daughters were taken captives. Then David and the people that were with him lifted up their voice and wept, until they had no more power to weep. And David's 2 wives were taken captive, Ahinoam, the Jezreelitess, and Abigail, the wife of Nabal, the Carmelite. And David was greatly distressed. And I have in big, bold, red print, "For the people spake of stoning him," because the soul of all the people was grieved, every man for his sons and for his daughters. But David encouraged himself in the Lord. But David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. And David said to Abiathar the priest, Ahimelech's son, "I pray thee, bring me hither the ephod." And Abiathar brought thither the ephod to David. 1 Samuel chapter 30, verses 8 through 14 reads, "And David inquired at the Lord, saying, Shall I pursue after this troop? Shall I overtake them? And he answered, Pursue, for thou shalt surely overtake them, and without fail recover all. So David went, he and his 600 men that were with him, and came to the brook Besor, where those that were left behind stayed. But David pursued, he and 400 men, for 200 abode behind, which were so faint that they could not go over the brook Besor. And they found an Egyptian in the field, and brought him to David, and gave him bread, and he did eat. And they made him drink water, and they gave him a piece of a cake of figs, and 2 clusters of raisins. And when he had eaten, his spirit came again to him, for he had eaten no bread nor drunk any water 3 days and 3 nights. And David said unto him, To whom belongest thou? And whence art thou? And he said, I am a young man of Egypt, servant to an Amalekite. And my master left, because 3 days gone I fell sick. We made an invasion upon the south of the Cherethites, and upon the coast which belongeth to Judah, and upon the south of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag with fire. So let's unpack what we just read for clarity. King Achish tells David, yo, my boys ain't feeling you, and they refuse to go to battle against your king with you. David plays stupid. He says, oh, shucks, really, boss? I so wanted to go to battle and kill my own people. King Achish of Gath, after referring to David as an angel of God, sends him on his way. He says, in the morning at first light, you and your boys got to go. So David says, reluctantly, whatever you say, boss. In the morning, David leaves. 3 days later, he gets back to Ziklag and finds it has been burnt to a crisp. The Bible says David and his men are grieved. Of course they are. They've been robbed of their sons, daughters, and wives their sons, they're all of their family, their vulnerable family that they left behind, the women and children have all been taken as slaves. And the Bible says that the people, David's boys, his aces, who have stuck their necks on the line for him, who have risked everything, their entire livelihood for David. The Bible says they speak of stoning David. Look at me. Why is this important? Why am I making a big deal about this? Because as well liked as David is, as popular as he may be, what the Bible is showing you is he's still human. His people who have sacrificed everything for him, these 600 people who came to live with him on the run in the wilderness, have been sleeping outside and in caves. They speak of stoning David. So I'm giving you some perspective of just how pissed off and grieved they are. But the Bible says David encourages himself in the Lord. This is what David has going for him. And let me give you this silver lining. They find no dead within the burnt city. So they know all the people have been taken captive alive. So that's the silver lining. But David does something where Saul lacked, David excels. The Bible says even though his troops are speaking of mutiny, it says he strengthens himself in the Lord. He doesn't crack under pressure like Saul. He doesn't fold like a napkin like his predecessor. He goes to God. He says, what should I do? God says, hawk them fools, hawk them coons down. It's time for a coon hunt. So David and his boys, he says, look later for that. Let's go overtake these people and get our stuff and our families back. He rallies the troops. 200 of his 600 are so tired, they've just traveled 3 days nonstop, and now they pursuing this Amalekite horde who's taking their family captive as slaves. 200 of the 600 cannot go any further. They stay with the stuff. So David takes his remaining 400 men and they pursue these Amalekites. They come to a young Egyptian. And you know David and his boys are just like, stay alive. Whatever you do, stay alive. They feed him bread and raisins and cake figs. They give him water and they just like, dude, just stay alive. Stay alive long enough to point us in the right direction of them coons that stole our stuff. And the Egyptian does. 1 Samuel chapter 30 verses 15 through 20 reads, and David said to him, meaning this young Egyptian boy, canst thou bring me down to this company? Because the Egyptian boy has just filled in the blanks and put the missing puzzle pieces together for David. He was with these Amalekites. He served one of these Amalekites who burned Ziklag, but he fell sick. So his master left him behind. And it says, and David said to him, canst thou bring me down to this company? And he said, swear unto me by God that thou wilt neither kill me nor deliver me into the hands of my master, and I will bring thee down to this company. And when he had brought them down, behold, they were spread abroad upon all the earth, eating and drinking and dancing, because of all the great spoil that they had taken out of the hand of the Philistines and out of the land of Judah. And David smote them from the twilight even to the evening of the next day. That's 24 hours, y'all. That's almost 24 hours. And there escaped not a man of them, save 400 young men which rode upon camels and fled. And David recovered all. That the Amalekites had carried away. And then some, folks. He got all his stuff back and then some. And David rescued his 2 wives And there was nothing lacking to them, neither small nor great, neither sons nor daughters, neither spoil, nor anything that they had taken to them. David recovered all. See, David didn't just get, let me look at me for a second. David just didn't get back the stuff that the Amalekites stole from him. He got all the stuff that the Amalekites had stole from everybody else. The Amalekites was on a pillage and plunder and raid party. They didn't just hit Ziklag, they hit a number of areas. So David didn't just get his stuff back. He got all his and then some, all the other stuff that the Amalekites stole from others. He got that too. It says David recovered all. And David took all the flocks and the herds, which they drave before those other cattle, and said, this is David's spoil. David just upgraded. 1 Samuel chapter 30 verses 21 through 25 reads, and David came to the 200 men which were so faint that they could not follow David, whom they had made also to abide at the brook Besor. That's the name of the brook Besor. And they went forth to meet David and to meet the people that were with him. And when David came near to the people, he saluted them. Then answered all the wicked men and the men of Belial, of those that went with David, and said, because they went not with us, we will not give them aught of the spoil that we have recovered, save to every man his wife and his children, that they may lead them away and depart. Then said David, ye shall not do so, my brethren, with that which the Lord hath given us, who hath preserved us, and delivered the company that came against us into our hand. For who will hearken unto you in this matter? And I have in big, bold, red print. But as his part is that goeth down to the battle, so shall his part be that tarried by the stuff. They shall part alike. And it was so from that day forward that he made it a statute and an ordinance for Israel unto this day. I'm going to clean all this up. Just give me a second. 1 Samuel chapter 30 verses 26 through 31 reads, and when David came to Ziklag, he sent of the spoil unto the elders of Judah, even to his friends, saying, behold, a present for you of the spoil of the enemies of the Lord, to them which were in the south Ramoth, and to them which were in Jatir, and to them which were in Aurora, and to them, I'm saying this is all the places he sent gifts to. He says, behold, a present for you of the spoil of the enemies of the Lord, to them which were in south Ramoth, to them which were in Jatir, and to them which were in Aurora, and to them which were in Sifma, and to them which were in Eshtemoa, and to them which were in Raquel, or Rachel, and to them which were in the cities of the Jerahmeelites, and to them which were in the cities of the Kenites, who I believe are not Israelites, but are allies of the Israelites. They may be, I'm not sure. And to them which were in Korashan, and to them which were in Athak, and to them which were in Hebron, and to all the places where David himself and his men were wont to hunt. Okay, I think this is the last one. This is the last slide. 1 Samuel chapter 31 says, 1 Samuel chapter 31, 1 through 7 reads, now the Philistines fought against Israel. Okay, now let's get into King Saul's part. Okay, so before we get there, let me break down what just happened with David. David overtakes these Amalekites who stole his stuff and his wives and his people's stuff and wives and kids. And he utterly slaughters every last one of them except for 400 young men that rode on camels. They got away, but they went away empty-handed. David just upgraded to the max. I'm not going to emphasize or go into how much David just came up. Just take my word for it. David is a wealthy person as a result of spoiling the Amalekites. He has so much wealth and resources now. He sends gifts to specific areas. The reason I'm telling you this is because David is a master politician. He is not just a man of faith. He is not just a warrior and a man of war and a mighty valiant man, as was described by one of the Israelite soldiers. He's not just a genius. He is a mastermind politician. He gets it. He's got a massive amount of wealth. He doesn't hoard it and keep it all to himself. He starts sending gifts and what we call in modern day greasing palms. He sends gifts to his friends. He sends gifts to the people who are in charge of the places that he likes to hide out, that he likes to hunt. He sends gifts to people in high places who have influence and power. David is flexing his muscle and stretching and broadening his influence. The man is a mastermind politician. He is smart for doing this. He's building relationships. He's networking. He's giving favors. He's attaching strings. He's putting powerful people in his pocket. Genius. So while this is all happening, not to mention, when David returns with his spoil to the 200 men that were left behind and too tired to help him fight, them 200 men, they've said among themselves, the Bible calls them wicked and men of Belial, because they're under the assumption, yeah, I bet the men then told David, the men who didn't stay behind, the men who actually went to fight, they told David, yeah, don't give the men nothing that stayed behind because they didn't fight. That's what they assume to themselves. So when David returns to these 200 who assuming they ain't getting nothing, he says, nah, bruh. He says, we are one and we gonna divvy this stuff up equally among ourselves. The people who went to fight get the same portion as the people who stayed with the stuff because they was too tired to fight. He said, nah, bruh. He said, we had a great victory. We ain't about to turn around and start fighting amongst ourselves. We finna do right by this stuff. Brilliant. Genius. Political mastermind. And add to his accolades, he's just, he's fair, and he's kind-hearted. The reason I'm telling you all this is because David is a success story, and if you want to be a success story, you look at somebody, nobody did it better. That's why I'm taking the time to tell you all this. Nobody does it better than David. Nobody wins better than David. Nobody rules better than David. Take notes. Take a page out of his book. This is how it's done. So as this is occurring, simultaneously, 1 Samuel chapter 31 verses 1 through 7 says, now the Philistines fought against Israel. So as David's fighting and going against these Amalekites, the Philistines are going against Israel and Saul, king of Israel. It says, now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell down slain in Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines followed hard upon Saul and upon his sons. And the Philistines slew Jonathan and Abinadab and Melchishua, Saul's sons. And the battle went sore against Saul, and the archers hit him, and he was sore wounded of the archers. Then said Saul unto his armor-bearer, draw thy sword and thrust me through therewith, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and abuse me. But his armor-bearer would not, for he was sore afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell upon it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he fell likewise upon his sword and died with him. So Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor-bearer, and all his men, the same day together. And when the men of Israel that were on the other side of the valley, and they that thereon the other side of Jordan saw that the men of Israel fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they forsook the cities and fled, and the Philistines came and dwelt in them. So let's unpack what we just read for clarity's sake. While David is winning, Saul is simultaneously losing. The Philistines have brought the war to Saul. They attack and they're winning. Now, the Philistines, let me just take a couple minutes to talk about the Philistines. They have been a thorn in Saul's side since he was crowned king. They have been a thorn in the side of the Israelites since they came into the land. The Philistines are the children of Israel's greatest and most formidable foe. When they first got there, God kept them at bay with one of the judges. One of the judges killed 600 Philistines. It was a devastating blow, and it kept the Philistines at bay for a little while. They just had skirmishes with the children of Israel. Then the last judge, before the last judge, Samson kept the Philistines at bay. One-man army killed over 3,000 Philistines in his lifetime. Then it was Samuel, the last judge of Israel, who kept the Philistines at bay. So what I'm trying to get over to you is that God has always stood in the way of the Philistines. It's always been something keeping them from just straight annihilating the children of Israel. The Philistine host, the army, the soldiers, they are better trained, they are better equipped, they are better organized, they have better weapons, they have better resources. For instance, the Philistine army, they're using iron, whereas the Israelites have to get their iron from the Philistines. They don't know how to make it, and they don't have it. They have to, yeah. No, I didn't. Call Mom, she mail. No, I did not. Folks, my most humble apologies. That was the old man himself looking for his white pants. So the Philistines, they're in much better shape. I'm saying the individual Philistine soldier is in much better shape than the Israelite soldier. These Philistines, they show their numbers to Saul. They come out in force. Saul knows it from the very beginning. That's why he goes to see the witch of Endor. These Philistines, they've come out in force. And the Bible says the battle goes sore against Saul. His sons are killed and he's hit with the archers. So now nothing stands between. Well, before, there have been numerous judges and catastrophes and weather events and circumstances and happenstances that have stood in the way of the Philistines. And now the only thing between King Saul and the Philistine horde is his armor bearer. His sons have been killed. They either dying or dead. And Saul is wounded. There's no way out. his worst nightmare, meaning King Saul, his worst nightmare, the thing he has been in denial about for the past 38 years, the thing he has been running from the majority of his reign as king, is happening and playing out right in front of his eyes in real time. This is the tragedy of the story of King Saul. So, seeing no way out, desperate as they come, wounded, unable to continue to run, Saul begs his armor bearer to kill him. He says, "Lest these uncircumcised Philistines take me captive and torture me to death." But the armor bearer is shook to death, and he can't raise his sword to kill his master. So Saul does it himself. He goes out. He takes the punk roll out. I hate to say it. I got nothing against Saul. I think he was a good, standard, average, nothing to write home about king. David puts him to shame, but that don't mean he's a bad king. He just don't measure up to the likes of David. But that don't take away from the fact he went out like a chump. He fell upon his own sword. He killed himself so that his enemies wouldn't be able to take pleasure in killing him theyself. He falls on his own sword. And the Bible says when his armor bearer sees this, he does the same. So ends the reign of King Saul, the very first king of Israel. Now, one could only hope that they don't find themselves in this predicament. Because even though I said Saul went out like a punk, put in those shoes, how many of us wouldn't have did the same thing? 1 Samuel chapter 31 verses 8 through 13 reads, "And it came to pass on the morrow, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, that they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen in Mount Gilboa. And they cut off his head and stripped off his armor and sent it into the land of the Philistines round about to publish it in the house of their idols and among the people. And they put his armor in the house of Ashtaroth. And they fastened his body to the wall of Beth-shan. And when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard of that which the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and went all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Beth-shan and came to Jabesh and burnt them there. And they took their bones and buried them there under a tree in Jabesh and fasted 7 days." So let's unpack what we've just read for clarity. So it's a common practice for the winning army to pick through the army of the slain and spoil them for their armor, for whatever coins they might have around in their pocket, for whatever jewelry they might have around their neck. They might even take your teeth if you got a good set of them. So as the Philistines are picking through the many bodies of the slain Israelites, they come across none other than Saul and his 3 slain sons and his slain armor bearer. And they desecrate and defile the bodies of Saul and his sons. They cut off their heads. They chop them up into pieces. They send the body parts all throughout the Philistine land so they can publish it and brag about it and shame the Israelites and humiliate them. Look what we did to your first king. And you got to understand something. Let me just take a minute to explain something to you. The reason that the Philistines are so aggressive and have always been so aggressive towards the Israelites is because they feel like the Israelites came in and conquered that land, which they did. And that's why none of those nations like Israel over there. To this day, To this day, they don't like Israel over there because they feel like Israel came over there, invaded, and conquered a land that was not theirs. So that's why the Philistines at any chance are looking to humiliate the Israelites. The Philistines are looking to humiliate the Israelites at any chance. Understand, Saul is the very first king of this fledgling nation that's just starting out in the land of Canaan. So the Philistines have been chomping at the bit to destroy the first king of Israel. And after 40 years, they finally succeeded. They chop up Saul and his sons' bodies, chop off their heads, and the wall that they fasten the bodies to is in Israelite territory. Here's sand in your eye. Here's dirt in your eye. Just pouring salt in the wound. Now, the men of Yabesh Gilead, and if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong if you know, it says the valiant men of Yabesh Gilead, I believe that's from the area of Jephthah, one of the judges of Israel, if you remember his story. Jephthah. I think the episode was called The Outcast. I believe these men from Yabesh Gilead is from around the area where Jephthah reigned as judge. These valiant men come down and they take down the bodies. They burn them and give them a proper burial and observe proper customs. And here's a map for your own viewing pleasure of how it all happened. The solid arrow is the Israelite force. The broken up arrow is the Philistine force. The Philistines, they gather here at Shunem. Saul and his forces gather opposite them at Jezreel. Here at Jezreel. Before the battle, the night before the battle, or a couple days before the battle, Saul takes the tremendous risk and sneaks behind enemy lines to Endor, only for the witch of Endor to tell him what Samuel had already told him. So Saul goes back. They meet the Philistines in battle. The Philistines put them to flight. Saul and his sons die somewhere here in Mount Gilboa. The Philistines find Saul's and his sons' bodies the next day. They desecrate and defile them. They nail the remains of those bodies to a wall in Beth Shean, here deep in Israelite territory. And the rest is history. Folks, the story of King Saul is a sad and tragic tale. If I've said it once, I've said it 1,000,000 times, and I can't say it enough. It's one of the saddest stories in the Bible, and to me, it very may well be the saddest story in the Holy Bible. And that book is full of sad stories. If he ain't got the saddest story, it's among the top 3. Tragedy, calamity, failure, envy, jealousy, disobedience, unfaithfulness, and also a valiant warrior and a good and decent king who was not without his flaws. King Saul is something to be said for him. David refused to kill him even when he had the chance on multiple occasions. David had plenty of opportunities to kill Saul, but he wouldn't. Why? Because though misguided as Saul was, David recognized that Saul was the rightful first king of Israel. He was God's anointed, God's chosen, and he was a warrior. Saul didn't start off bad. His first 2 years, he started off good. But the majority of his reign was saturated with evil of some sort. If it wasn't one thing, it was another, or it was all of them at once. And hard as King Saul might try, he just couldn't get right. He just couldn't get right. From the very beginning, he had cold feet. He had a good run his first 2 years, and then he sinned. He sacrificed when he wasn't supposed to, out of fear. Out of fear. Years later, he was instructed to annihilate the Amalekites. He saved the best of them for himself. Their cattle, their goods, their jewelry, their linen. And worst of all, the Amalekite king himself. And why did he do this? Out of fear. This time out of fear of his own people, who wanted to spoil the Amalekites, even though he was instructed not to. Then, before that, he unjustly, on multiple occasions, tries to kill the best soldier in his army. He breaks vow after vow concerning David. It's really, with David comes along, Saul really undoes himself. He undoes himself. He completely unravels over this boy. Ladies and gentlemen, I can do another video on the tragedy of Saul, but we getting close to my hour limit, and you know I don't want to hear my mama mouth. So with that, we've come to the part of the episode where I thank you for joining me. If you're new to this channel, once again, hit that like and subscribe button. If you got any comments, compliments, or insults, leave them in the comments section. If you got any specific topics that you want me to go over, leave them in the comments section. You want to argue with the soap man? Leave it in the comments section. I'm not above arguing and bickering. Look, I'm a pig. And when you fight a pig, both of y'all get dirty. Only the pig likes it. So, I'm not above arguing and bickering when I got time. Holla at your boy. Let me know how I'm doing. Let me know what you like, what you don't like, what I can improve on. Just communicate with me in the comment section. Yo, this is Soap Man signing out. I'll see you next time. Same soap time, same soap channel. We out.